Chapter 211, The Battle Begins. The winter night is full of golden watches, and the cold moon and cold light shine on the iron clothes. Outside the large camp of the soldiers outside Zinzhou city, all kinds of soldiers have been arrayed in front. The infantry was in the center, the cavalry was on the flanks, and the archers were behind the infantry in the front. A small portion of the infantry were heavy infantry, armed with shields in one hand and swords in the other, and were designed to restrain the Tatar nomadic archers, capable of both attacking and defending against the enemy's bows and arrows. It's just that there are more light infantry and light cavalry, with less load, fast movement, and easy adjustment. If you command it properly, in this dim night, you can be like a feather leaf, quietly completing a bloody killing raid. On the tower of the city, the drums of war grew stronger. In the dark night, the torches are lit and the flags are fluttering in the wind. The faces of the 30,000 soldiers were blurred by light and shadow. On the platform, the blood stains of the old days have been cleaned, leaving only the mottled learning to dry up in the cracks and wooden cracks, and Yan Lin's well-defined and stoic face is incomparably bright because it stands on a high place. Before the red sun rises, he is the sun in the night. The scorching fire burned in the depths of his pupils, making the ambitions and revenge that had been suppressed for the past 2 years rise up with the boiling heart at this moment, turning into a wave of spirit that swept through the sky, making him draw his sword out of its sheath and lift the 3-foot green peak high. For a time, the 4 fields were full of mountains and tsunamis. Step on the wild goose gate, defend the country. Kill the Tartars, save the princess. Death and life are thrown, don't lose each other. There were 100,000 soldiers in Zinzhou, but they fell under the rule of the Xiao family. One was chaotic in military affairs, and the other was negligent in training, and less than half of the people who could really be selected to go to the battlefield in a short period of time. On this occasion of winter, attacking Tatar is not a common victory for soldiers. When it is a strange victory, a quick victory, a narrow victory, although Tatar is a country, it can be compared with the Great Jian, but the land of 3 provinces, 30,000 soldiers are enough to catch the other side off guard, disgraced. The prince is like this. There are some heroes who feel like they are teenagers. On the high city tower, Lucien stood beside the burning torches, feeling the cold wind blowing on his face, looking at the scene of the army attacking in the distance. He couldn't help but sigh deeply, but then there was some silence. The rise and fall of the people are bitter. I don't know how many people will die in this battle. Xie Wei was not far away. On the tower of the castle stood an arrow target on the flat ground. His pale robe was blown by the cold wind of hunting, but his cold, cool-soaked fingers rested on the longbow, and he dragged a carved arrow, aimed it at the center of the target, and said, "What?" Lucien was speechless. Although he has never been a saint who is compassionate to all sentient beings, if he sees the suffering of the common people and the suffering of the world, he will inevitably feel a little bit of kinship. But Xie, who seems to be humble and forbearing, is benevolent, but when it comes to this kind of blood-stained thousands of miles and military disasters and wars, he vaguely shows an astonishing coldness. Human life is a mustard, and all living beings are pawns. However, it is undeniable that in this astonishing coldness, there is a kind of candlelight and insight that is almost independent of the world. There is no way in nature, and man is the master. However, the world is mediocre, and the people have no wisdom. How can we stand without breaking down, and how can we live without dying? In this world, there is no reason to talk about the word death. If you don't know death, how can you know life? There was a whoosh sound. The eagle arrow went away from the string, and hit the arrow target with a bang, and the force was so fierce that the wooden arrow target was cracked, and with a click sound, it fell backwards, and there was a loud bang in the cold night. Xie Wei's expressionless face was as calm as a deep stream. I let them know that they are alive and that they should thank me. Lucien held his breath for a long time before he slowly exhaled a breath, but he was more certain than the previous 2 days, Siejuan's mood was really bad. Asterisk. The farther north you go, the later it dawns. It was almost over, and the tent on the Tatar border was still shrouded in a dim dark blue, and it was extremely quiet. The soldiers on patrol were in the middle of the handover, and they either stayed up all night or had just woken up, and most of them were a little sleepy, and it was the time when vigilance was at its lowest. But at this moment, a scream broke the silence. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Dakian's army is coming, enemy attack dash. Some people didn't even hear it clearly for the first time, thinking that they were in a dream, and it took several steps to react, stunned and shocked. All the tents were suddenly full of people. The sleeping soldiers hurriedly put on their armor and went into battle, and the sentinels who passed the news quickly jumped on horseback and rushed to the royal court. Who would have imagined that this unusual surprise attack? It is neither in the spring season, nor in the sunny day, but in the winter that they think is absolutely impossible, and the cold night that is absolutely impossible. Attack it unprepared, so as to be prepared to fight without trouble. As the saying goes, soldiers, treacherous ways. The Tatar king Yanda was in the prime of life, and last night he had a hearty battle with several concubines. In fact, he had only stopped for a short time, and suddenly heard the alarm signal outside, only to feel a headache. How could a good man attack in? Could it be that the news leaked? His face was full of beard, and although his eyebrows were quite heroic, he was lost. That woman, what about that woman? The maidservants who were waiting on the left and right all trembled and knelt on the ground, and in the past 2 years, they had already clearly known that the woman in the king's mouth was the princess who had come to the Tatar and kissed back then, and hurriedly trembled. According to the king's orders, she was kept in the tent, and she has not been allowed to go out again these days. Yanda's chest rose and fell, and he walked out of the king's tent with his sword. Along the way, he immediately arranged to deal with the surprise attack, but he did not stop until he walked to a tent with a 3-jong square circle at the eastern end of the royal court. By this time it was already getting light. The tent was lit up. A slender figure fell on the snow-white tent, and Shenzai had already heard the noisy and chaotic movement outside and got up. When Yanda rudely lifted the curtain and entered, she turned her back to the outside, her hair curled up high, revealing a slender and white neck, and at some point she had changed into the colorful clothes of the Tartars, wearing only her old clothes, and opened the dusty box for a long time. There was the crown of the princess of the empire. The palace clothes woven by the best silk, in the light that is not bright enough, also flow with glittering brilliance, the gold and silver embroidery threads flying cranes turn phoenixes, still new, cold and gorgeous. Yanda pulled out a knife and put it on her neck, gritted his teeth fiercely and asked, "Is it you?" Shenzai turned her face to look at him. The faint scar under the corner of her eye was like an old scar like rouge, imprinting her origin and encounters, and also making her feel no sense of the blade on her neck, just gently curled the corners of her lips, calm and cold. "Kill me, you all have to die." Chapter 212, Arrogance. When the war is fought together, it is like a weed on the wasteland, with a little spark, and when it is blown by the wind, it will be overwhelming, showing the trend of burning the plain. The drums of war on a cold winter night are as fierce as thunder. Startled by the dreams of the Tatars in their preparation for battle, the sharp blades of spears and swords soaked the blood into the cold frozen earth, and when the bleak morning sun sprinkled the light all over the land, it reflected one after another a bitter rouge. The light cavalry marched the fastest, the crossbowmen were hidden among the light infantry, covered by the flanks, and the rain of arrows flew away long before the Tatar soldiers approached, shooting down countless horses and cavalry in the array. The man fell from his horse, and the horse fell to the ground with a neighing. The latecomers may be hindered by it, avoid it, and hit it squarely, or react quickly and adjust the formation to the sides, but they will inevitably be scattered like an ant colony. The original purging formation was almost immediately torn open in the middle. Yan Lin stood on the high place of the chariot and looked out, and immediately made a decision, ordered the drummer to change the drum beat, and changed the marching order. The cavalry marched from both flanks to outflank the attacking camp, while the heavy infantry with swords and shields pierced through the enemy's torn weakness like a spear, and the arrows of the crossbowmen no longer flew into the air, but simultaneously covered the advance of the heavy infantry advancing into the enemy's formation. In this attack on the Tatars, most of the selected troops were fast-moving troops, and Yan Lin's order was decisive and unhesitating, and its sudden changes really caught the Tatar side by surprise. By the time the opposing generals realized that it was too late, the right flank of the Tatar army formation was 4,000 or 5,000 people, and they were cut out and separated from the main force of the army in the midst of the outflanking of the light cavalry and the advance of the heavy infantry. And the light infantry on the side of the Great Khader have been waiting for them for a long time. The sound of killing suddenly started. A mere 4,000 or 5,000 men fell into a heavy encirclement, struggling with all their strength, fighting endlessly. How could they resist the superiority of the number and arms of the Dacians' side? Moreover, when they fell into the encirclement of the enemy, there was already panic, and the fierce offensive struck, and the people were even more defeated. The victory of all wars starts with a small advantage, seizes the opportunity, and snowballs downward. Every penny, every foot. In the face of being prepared for an attack, the young general showed astonishing calmness and decisiveness, and did not slack off at all because of his own advantages, and did not even take the initiative to make progress. The loss of 4,000 or 5,000 men in the first confrontation was already a huge loss for the Tatars. After that, the formation changed several times, but it was never able to inflict heavy damage on the opponent. If you still have to fight with the big Khatars for a while, you will undoubtedly be able to fight the head, regardless of the overall situation. Therefore, after launching a wave of rapid charges, the Tatar side directly collected their troops and ordered all the soldiers to retreat to their border fortresses. Many of the generals of the Great Khader were very excited, and they could almost see the military exploits in front of them, imagining how to increase the rank after stepping on the Tatars, and immediately strongly recommended Yan Lin to take advantage of the victory to pursue, beat the water dogs, and extinguish the arrogance of the Tartars in one go, so that they knew that the Great Khader was still the Great Khader, and the iron hooves of the Great Khader were what they should be. Afraid of. Unexpectedly, Yan Lin ignored it. A few orders went down, without the slightest love of fighting, and directly ordered the troops to be collected and returned to the camp. It is inevitable that some people in the military will criticize it. However, the victory is ahead. Even if they have criticism, they can't stop Yan Lin's prestige and momentum that suddenly rose in the army, not to mention that the allocation of grain and grass in the army has already been replaced by Lucien's people, and they are obedient to Yan Lin, and others have no power to speak and dispatch at all. If there is no food and grass, what will you do to fight? Even if you have 11,000 dissatisfaction in your stomach, you have to grit your teeth and swallow it patiently, and you have to bow down to this young general during the deliberations in the camp. The first battle was a surprise attack, as fast as a lightning bolt. In the next few days, this tactic was brought to the extreme, constantly sending troops to harass the enemy, but instead of forcibly pressing the formation with a large army, it only pecked at the opponent's flesh and blood little by little like an eagle predatoring, weakening the opponent's strength again and again. At the same time, the training of the remaining troops in the battalion is being intensified. The most painful thing is to cut the flesh with a blunt knife. The Tatar side had already seen the other side's intentions after only 3 times, and when it came to the 4th time, the royal court came to reinforce the troops, and a full 40,000 soldiers gathered at the border pass, intending to wait for the light cavalry of the Great Khader side to attack again, and then attack head-on, so that the other side would not return. However, when the battle came to this day, they were faced with a frenzied army of 50,000. Among these 50,000 people, light cavalry accounted for only a minority, and more were heavy cavalry, heavy crossbowmen, and heavy infantry. Jinji Iron Horse, indestructible. As soon as Fang fought, it was like a huge black iron chariot, with the power of crushing, covering the Tatar army formation like grinding meat, destroying their meticulous plan. The Tatar side couldn't believe it. When did Wang Cheng, the general of Xinzhou, lead his troops to fight? 3 sentry spies were sent to inquire. The first 2 groups were all lost, and it wasn't until the 3rd group that they luckily brought back the news. In the Xinzhou army, where is there any Wang Cheng? The generals who defeated them this time and retreated one after another, their surname is Yan Minglin, and the single word is Hui. As early as a month ago, he had already taken office, and beheaded Wang Cheng, completed his control of military power with the blood of the old generals, and then advanced today's chilling war with the fastest speed. The war had only been going on for 10 days, and the Tatar side was already deeply overwhelmed. Even if Yanda was furious, he could not reverse this defeat that had been at a disadvantage from the beginning on his own, and sent an envoy on the 11th day to send a peace letter to Yan Lin, and the words also mentioned that the princess was pregnant and would give birth to the blood of the 2 countries, and blamed the war for not being there. Yan Lin slashed the envoy and sent the head back to the tent of the Tatar king. The so-called wolf ambition cannot be wiped out in a day. If you want to stop evil people from doing evil, it is not enough to believe them by their tongues and a piece of paper and a book. Only by cutting off their minions, pumping their muscles and bones, and beating the other party to hate, fear, and have no power to fight back, can they live in peace for a day. So next, he did it right? Not only did they continue to fight, but they fought harder than before. The morale of the army is all beaten. All the way to blood, all the way to the battle, the momentum is like a rainbow, it is simply swept away from the decadence of the past. On the 22nd day of November, the army of the great Qatars was like a yellow dragon, smashing the Tatar royal court. The soldiers were approaching the city. Yan Lin's war horse stopped in front of the king's tent, and the 3-foot green peak reflected his young face, only to the Tatar royal family trembling all over the ground, and said a word. Yan is here to welcome the princess back to the court. When the princess is welcomed, our army will go by itself, and please don't panic. What a just to welcome the princess. Listening to it in Tatar ears is like a slap in the face with a smile. The opponent's army slaughtered all the way from the Yanmen Pass, pulled out their city, killed their soldiers, and even the fallen king's banner was trampled by blood-stained iron hooves. Slapped your face with a slap, and then smiled and said to you, "We just wanted to pick someone up." It's really good not to lift weights, so not to be ruthless and arrogant. Asterisk. The war at the border is in full swing, and the soldiers are breaking through the bamboo, and it is naturally impossible for the news to cover up such a big movement. On the day when Yan Lin led the army to level the Tatar royal court, the news of the border pass went through many obstacles, and finally arrived in the capital in a panic, passed through the gate of the forbidden city, and arrived at the emperor's bedroom. This fashion is in the long night. The sound of copper leakage, the red sandalwood is strong. Xiao Shu didn't sleep deeply, and after serving Shen Lang and using the 5 stone powders, although she also lay down on the dragon couch, there was a slight movement outside, and she woke up. The palace burned the earth dragon, and it was warm. She got up with a thin shirt like a light veil, brushed open the gorgeous beaded curtain, and the distant mountains frowned slightly. In addition to the bright and graceful appearance of the past, there was a little more prestige that a favorite concubine could have. Even though she looked lazy at the moment, who in the 6 palaces didn't know her methods? Standing outside was Zheng Bao. Wang Xinyi has grown old over the years, and many things have been handed over to this apprentice, who is clever and sensitive, and can be regarded as Wang Xinyi's true inheritance, knowing the emperor's preferences, and slowly gaining the Sacred Heart. However, Xiao Shu has never cared much about this eunuch. She was afraid of arguing with Shen Lang, so she came out and asked, "What's going on outside?" Zheng Bao bowed down and said, "Back to Niang, report urgently at the border." Xiao Shu raised her eyebrows sharply, "Urgent report." As soon as Zheng Bao whispered the news from outside, her whole face changed, and she suddenly turned around and woke up Shen Lang on the dragon couch. Within a moment, the urgent edict in the palace reached the palaces of the ministers. In the capital in the quiet night, all the chickens and dogs are crowing for a while, the rich families, the princes and uncles' mansions are brightly lit, and the official sedan chairs and carriages gather in the palace from all directions. Shen Lang didn't even believe what he heard. Yan Lin has raised troops, so where is Mr. Xia? The messenger trembled. I heard that when Mr. Xia arrived in Dexenzhou, the thief had already taken control of the military power, and sent someone to control the young master and strictly guard it. But. Shen Lang's face was angry. But what? Summon the news and immediately kowtowed. However, there are also rumors in the market that young Master Xia has bad intentions, and after arriving in Dexenzhou, he actually helped the thieves to rectify military affairs, and he also became disgusted. Presumptuous. Shen Lang has been taking Wushizhen for nearly 2 years, and the medicinal power of Xian Yidi is in full bloom, and when he is surging in impatience, when he hears this, he only feels a stream of qi and blood rushing to the top of his head, making his eyes red in an instant, and he picked up the inkstone on the case and smashed it down. The best inkstone is very heavy. The messenger was smashed to the door of the head, bleeding profusely, and almost fainting in pain, but he didn't even dare to wipe it, and begged for mercy on his knees. Many court officials who rushed to the court after receiving the urgent edict didn't dare to step into the palace when they saw this scene. One by one, they all knelt down outside the temple. Shen Lang's gloomy voice rolled out of the gloomy hall with thunderous rage. The treasury has not been moved, and the household department has not moved. Since ancient times, the 3 armies have been fighting with soldiers, horses, food, and grass. That is, his wolf ambition, holding the power of the army, and he must devote the strength of the country to prepare for any battle. Where will he raise enough money and food to attack the Tatars? Is it possible that all the people in the household department are dead, and he can hide from the world and the sea under my nose? The ministers are all the first to hear the news of the chaos in the border gates, and they haven't even sorted out the clues. Originally, everyone felt that Xie Wei was gone, and everything was naturally fine. Who would have thought that even this emperor of the dynasty might be acting for the tiger now? Maybe he is the real culprit behind it. At this moment, I heard the emperor ask, where did they dare to speak out? Inside and outside the main hall, there was silence for a moment. Shen Lang really became angrier and angrier the more he looked at it, and he couldn't wait to give an order to drag out these wine bags and rice bags and cut them down. Xiao Shu has already put on a palace dress. She stood quietly on the side and watched for a long time, seeing that the ministers were silent, but the cold light flashed in her eyes, and after thinking for a while, she said softly, Shang, the Yan thief raised troops at the border pass, but he went to attack the Tatars first. This move is quite strange and unreasonable. According to the concubine's humble opinion, it is not that there is no room for turnaround. As for the food and grass needed by the soldiers and horses, it is the most important thing. Shen Lang's voice was cold. Do you have an idea? Xiao Shu immediately knelt on the ground, allowing herself to show a posture of absolute obedience. However, the words that came out were rare and clear. If there is no food and grass, the army will not be able to do it. If we can find out where the money and food for the thieves' raised troops come from, and cut off their foundation, we can achieve a plan to draw wages from the bottom of the kettle. The concubine remembered that there was a person, or she was afraid to know a thing or two. All the ministers looked at her in amazement. Even Shen Lang couldn't help but be shocked. Who? Xiao Shu raised her eyes and said categorically, Deputy Commander of Jinyi Guard, Zhou Yinzi. Asterisk. From the day when Yan Lin led the army to attack Tatar, Zhang Xuning went to the outside of the city every day to see it, and heard good news for several days, but there was no news of Shen Zai for a long time. That kind of tormented waiting is like begging for fate not to fall. Reliving a life, she saved Yu Fangyan, changed what happened to Yan Lin, and even changed her own life. Why can't she save Shen Zai now? She had reason to be hopeful. Day after day, I opened the box containing the homeland and looked at it over and over again. Finally, the fast horse from the front line came galloping on a moonlit night after the snow, and the tired but excited soldiers crossed the gate, came to her house, and reported to her in a hoarse voice, Second Missing, pass on the general's order, the Tatar royal court has been broken, Her Royal Highness the Princess is safe and sound, and will arrive at Yanmen Pass tomorrow morning, please go and greet her. At that moment, Zhang Xuning Huoran got up and almost knocked over the box. In the corner of the border city, the moon shines on the silver snow, and it is as bright as day. Xie Wei's car waited outside the city gate. The others sat in the car, but for some reason untied the knife on their wrists to look at it, and after a while, they asked, hasn't she come yet? Chapter 213, The Princess Returns to the Court. Zhang Xuning didn't expect Xie Wei to be waiting for him. She walked out of the mansion with the box in her arms, and when she saw the car waiting for her outside and the sword book standing next to it, she almost had the illusion of going back to 2 years ago. When I lifted the curtain and entered, I saw Xie Wei, and I became more and more in a trance. He was looking down and slowly arranging the folds on his sleeves, and when he saw her come in, he only glanced up, and said, let's go. His expression was bleak, but he didn't seem to have waited for her for a long time. There is a slight tiredness on the edges of the eyebrows, but it is not obvious. It's not because he's not tired, it's just because he's used to it, and even he doesn't feel that it matters, and others don't feel anything. Except for the night when he sat on the edge of her bed, I don't know if it was true or a dream, Zhang Xuning had hardly seen him again in the time since the war. The front line advances rapidly, and the rear will be disjointed if it cannot keep up. Lucien is very powerful, and he only manages the word money and food, and he has no official position, and he does not dare to say that he has complete vision and authority to take care of the affairs in the rear. Xie Wei naturally has to take care of it everywhere. It can even be said that the rear of the front is much busier than the front. Zhang Xuning said softly, hello sir, and sat quietly opposite Xie Wei. She still held the box in her hand and didn't let go. Xie Wei raised his eyes and glanced at it, and said, after welcoming back the princess this time, it's time for your wish to come true. Then leave the border pass. Where are you going? Zhang Xuning didn't expect him to be so straightforward, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was really normal. Lucien heard it that night, and it was not surprising that Xie Wei had some understanding of her plans. What's more, he has insight into people's hearts. If he can't even see through her careful thinking, where is he worthy of being the emperor of the dynasty? It's just that. She put her finger on the edge of the wooden box and lowered her eyes. Don't dare to tell, sir. Xie Wei said, at this time, I am willing to tell the truth again. But if I don't let you go, where can you flee? Zhang Xuning was silent and did not speak. Xie Wei also felt that she was so blocked when he saw her like this, and for a moment he wanted to scold her no matter what he said, and scolded her soberly. But she was so scared that she woke her up, so she ran to find Zhang Xia without hesitation. The carriage left the city and headed in the direction of Yanmen Pass. When Shen Zai went to kiss back then, it was twilight. Now that they are going to welcome her, the morning light is faint. There was silence in the car for a while. After a long time, Xie Wei glanced at the box she was holding again, and remembered the girl who couldn't cry silently and hugged her knees and cried, so she asked, "How can Shenzai be virtuous? Is it worth it for you to do everything for her?" There is some irony in this statement. Jiang Xuning only felt pricked by these words, raised her eyes to look at him, her pupils were a little colder, and she only said, "Your Highness is very good to me." In her previous life, her impression of Shenzai was really not good. But in this life, she just depicted a petal of cherry powder for her at the Chongyang banquet in King Yuan's Bafu, and said such an obvious flattering word, but she was really treated with sincerity. Studying in the Fengchen Palace, she is her backer. Knew that her temperament was not good, but after believing that she liked it, he indulged her and blessed her. No matter how others slandered her, Shenzai never doubted how she treated her before, and how she treated her later. But such a good person, because of her status as a princess, was up and down in the treacherous court, and she had to leave her hometown, go to Tatar and accept her unpredictable fate. Jiang Xuning can't forget that 2 years ago, Shenzai, who had almost been placed under house arrest, celebrated her birthday in Mingfeng Palace. There was also midnight, and the bowl of longevity noodles quietly served by the palace people. I just remember crying so much. The noodle soup is full of saltiness and astringency falling from tears, and whether it is delicious or not, I don't have much deep impression. Jiang Xuning blinked and said slowly, "A person like your highness, Mr. can't do it, and I can't do it." She said this seriously. However, Xie Wei only coldly pulled the corners of his lips, being imprisoned, being constrained by others, being a fish and meat under the knife of a person, such a person, Xie really can't do it? Jiang Xuning was choked and speechless. I just don't say anything. As the sky outside gradually brightened, the Yanmen Pass, which was built at the key point of the two mountains, finally gradually approached. The wind and sand outside the pass blew countless traces of vicissitudes from the rammed earth walls nearby. On the tower of the city gate are flying flags. There is also a besieged city that winds along with the mountain, and there are 3 large stone walls and more than 20 small stone walls built outside, almost enclosing the entire city into a strong fortress. Inside the pass is the fertile soil of the central plains, and outside the pass is the wilderness wind and sand. Shenzai still remembers the scenes she saw all the way out of the capital. Phonology changes, from prosperity to desolation. At that time, when the car passed through Yanmen, she looked back, the gray and yellowish city wall, as if it was dyed with blood in the twilight dusk, there was a poignant magnificence, and when she looked at the unknown road ahead, the sunset was sinking, the wind whined on the empty wilderness, and a winding and blurred road stretched forward, but it seemed to be connected to the sky, as if it was endless. After 2 years of hardship, she never thought that she would come back alive one day. When he was young, his playmate, who had become a general in command of the 3 armies, was now in front of the chariot, riding on the back of a black-hoofed horse, and the gradually brightening skylight fell on his shoulders. Shenzai only felt that one thing was wrong. Even the heart is full of desolation, and there is not much joy. Her bulging belly signaled the fact that she was about to become a mother, and it made her worry about the predicament she would soon face. All this gradually became clear as the carriage approached the Yanmen. At this moment, inside and outside the city, all the soldiers have already lined up and down the city wall, the armor is neat, and there may still be blood stains on the faces. But whether they are young or young, they all stand in the direction of the northwest wilderness. I don't know who first saw this winding procession like a long dragon from a distance, as well as the handsome flag where the team went, and immediately shouted loudly, "General Yan's handsome flag is General Yan's handsome flag. The princess is back, Her Royal Highness the Princess is back." At that moment, Jiang Xuning was shocked. After she arrived at Dianmen Pass, she followed Xie Wei to climb the high city wall and look into the distance, but the rising sun in the east was blazing, but it couldn't help but make her unable to open her eyes and see not very clearly. It wasn't until the long convoy finally passed the few shining spots in Jiang Xuaning's sight that she finally saw clearly that it was the car in the team that shook the curtain. Her heart beat so violently that she didn't even think about it. She lifted the corner of her skirt, and like a bird flapping its wings, she turned around, ran away from Xie, and ran down the steep steps on the city tower. Xie subconsciously stretched out his hand, but only touched the corner of her clothes. The brocade-sleeved robe was as smooth as the wind, leaving a slight coolness on his fingertips. When he raised his eyes again, he was already under the tower. The wind was cold, Jiang Xuaning didn't seem to feel it, and ran straight over from the countless soldiers standing under the city tower. Everyone around her couldn't help but look at her in surprise. But she still walked all the way through the wide open city gate, towards the procession that was gradually coming towards the Yanmen Pass, towards the most special frame in the procession, and still shouted, "Your Highness." Shenzai's cold heart suddenly trembled. The faintly familiar voice came against the wind. She got up and suddenly lifted the curtain that was hanging in front of her. The girl who had drawn a stroke on her cheek when she raised her hand, the girl who relied on her support to do whatever she wanted, the girl who tugged at her sleeve in the Imperial Garden and said that she would take her to escape, rushed out of the gate tower that had been eroded by the wind and sand for a long time, and broke into her sight with a long-lost and fiery freshness. She suspected that she was in a dream. The hot flashes that poured out of her eyes in an instant almost filled her cold heart. Nothing has changed. That Jiang Xuaning has not changed. The line stopped. Yan Lin is silent. Jiang Xuaning finally came to the front of the car. Her steps were in a hurry, but when she was really close, she raised her eyes and saw Shenzai standing on the wheel. The gorgeous palace clothes of the old years looked a little big on her, fluttering in the wind like a page. So a sudden melancholy struck her. Her steps stopped, and tears glistened in her bright eyes. However, the next moment, he bent his lips with a little stubbornness. The wooden box was close to his heart. In the brilliance of the morning sun, in the gale blowing in the side plug, Jiang Xuaning knelt down under the wheel, but held the wooden box high, stared at the princess standing, and smiled brightly, "Your Highness, your homeland, your homeland, your homeland, and your hometown." When he arrived, Yan Lin led the big dry iron hooves to break through the Yanmen. "Take this homeland and come to greet me. Return to the homeland and return to the homeland." Shenzai almost forgot that in order to deceive her of peace of mind, she had made such bold words and had such a promise with her. But she didn't take it as a joke. The tears that had been in her eyes for a long time finally rolled down when she took it from her hand and opened the wooden box. She bent down and hugged her young companion tightly, but her throat became so hard that she couldn't make a sound. The wilderness outside the gate is boundless. The army inside and outside Yanmen Pass was like a tide, but they all bowed down at this moment, bowed down to the beautiful princess who they couldn't see clearly, and shouted in unison, "Welcome your highness back to the court." The voice merged into a wave and swept into the air. And it became a torrent, and it sounded in the ears of men. The wind is hunting, the flag is watching, and it is evident in the vast border. Xiejuan stood high on the city wall and did not take a step. He is like a towering mountain cliff, not changed by the joys and sorrows of the world, only looking down on the clutch world coldly, and then hooking a smile with a faint anger. Shenzai's gaze crossed the void and unexpectedly fell on the city tower, colliding with his distant gaze. It's the old gentleman who lectured at Fengchen Temple. However, at this moment, there was not much long-lost kindness and familiarity in her heart, only an icy chill soaked into the bone marrow, and at the same time, there was an indescribable irony and sorrow. After all, she grew up in the palace, and she has not grown up in Tatar all these years. As early as when Yan Lin led the army to break through the Tatar royal court, she had already noticed one or two abnormalities. Asked Yan Lin, but Yan Lin didn't say. Until this moment, she saw Jiang Swining, who shouldn't have appeared at the border, and Xie Juan, who shouldn't have appeared. Shen Zai hugged Jiang Swining tighter, laughed with red eyes and choked up, "Silly Ning Ning." Chapter 214, A Cup of Wine. Jiang Swining didn't understand why she suddenly said that she was stupid. She raised her head to look at Shen Zai. But unexpectedly, at this moment, the body next to her shoulder shook for a while, and then pressed on her body, causing her to exclaim, "Your Highness." The tension of the past few days was relieved, fatigue welled up, and a faint pain suddenly appeared in Shen Zai's abdomen. A cold sweat broke out from her forehead. Her brow tightened, her eyes darkened, and she fainted without even saying a word. The people around him suddenly panicked. Even Yan Lin immediately turned over and dismounted. Jiang Swining only felt that her heart sank, and she saw a little blood stains on the hem of Shen Zhi's dress, and a sense of foreboding rose up. She panicked and shouted, "Doctor, quickly, pass on the doctor." Asterisk. Shen Zai was already pregnant, and when she was in totter, she was struggling because of her status as the eldest princess, and only she knew how much suffering she endured inside. What's more, after the war started, the Tatar king Yanda was quite urging him. One was worried about his homeland, and the other was worried about the war, and his mind was almost stretched to the extreme. When I arrived at Yanmen Pass, I saw the old man, and my emotions were even more ups and downs. How could there be no reason not to have an accident? This fainting turned out to be a premature birth. Yan Lin almost immediately ordered the whole army to find the mother who delivered the baby. But Yanmen Pass was originally built to resist foreign invasion, and the soldiers stationed on weekdays are soldiers, and now it is wartime, and the big men grab a handful, but the women can't see much, let alone the stable woman who delivers the baby. Fortunately, there were some doctors who accompanied the army to treat wounded soldiers. It took a lot of effort for these doctors to open a medical center in the customs to see people, and finally asked a few women who had had a baby and received a baby, so they hurriedly invited them. Almost all were waiting in the yard. Jiang Swining was even more pale. In the previous life, Shen Zai encountered an accident in Tatar, and the child with the blood of the Dakian and Tatar tribes naturally failed to keep it, so she didn't dare to think about what the result would be in this life. Obviously, everyone has been rescued. If because of this child. She stood outside the door curtain, listening to the noisy sound inside, only to feel that the tips of her fingers were cold, and Shen Zai's crying when she woke up from a coma made her heart feel numb. Tortured almost from morning to afternoon. Doctors who are not experienced enough are almost giving up. But at the end of the drowsy twilight came the cry of a baby in the room, not loud enough, not strong enough, like the meow of a weak kitten. The doctors were on the verge of tears. Stumbled out and said, "Boy, it's a boy, Her Royal Highness the eldest princess is safe and sound." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Jiang Swining froze for a day, and almost immediately fell to the ground. After a long while, he took the hand handed over by Yan Lin next to him, stood up forcefully, opened the door curtain and entered the house. After all, it is a desolate border pass, and this house is so simple that there are only tables, chairs, and beds. Shen Zai lay on her back on the couch. With tears in her eyes, the maid hugged the baby who was less than a month old and showed her. She only stretched out her weak fingers and gently stroked the baby's cheeks, and then saw Jiang Swining, and called in a hoarse voice, "Ning Ning." Jiang Swining's tears rained down. I don't dare to think about what kind of suffering and humiliation Shen Zai, who is from a noble background in Tatar. But when Fang Xiai's eyes turned to the baby, it was infinitely gentle. She walked to the side of the bed. "Congratulations to your highness, he is also safe." The baby in swaddling clothes, whose face was not as big as anyone's palm, was red and wrinkled, much smaller than the average full-term baby, and there was this moist fetal hair on the top of his head, and both eyes were closed tightly, muttering something that he didn't know what it meant. Shenzai really had no strength, and the fingers that were caressing the child's cheeks also drooped down, looked at Jiang Swining, and said, "For so long, I didn't think of what to name him. I thought it was a caring girl, not a boy. Ning Ning, help me come up with a name for him." Jiang Swining was stunned. After a long time, he said, "How about the word Xia? I hope he will grow up happily and healthily in the future." Shenzai read it lightly, blinked, and smiled slightly. "Follow my surname over there, and call it Shenjia in the future." Although her surname is Shen? Jiang Swining suddenly realized something, and there was a sour feeling in her heart, but she didn't dare to show half a sad color, but instead laughed and said, "Shenjia, Nian Nian is quite good." Asterisk. Now that Shenzai has been brought back, the border war has come to an end. The Tatars were badly wounded in the war for several days, and they could not recover in 3 or 5 years. Yanlin and Siewei would not do such a thing as slaughtering the city to ordinary people, and the Central Plains culture is not in common with the Tatars. Even if they occupy the city, it will take a lot of effort to govern, and there will be endless troubles. Therefore, although the royal court had been directly attacked, the army was withdrawn in batches in the following month. Naturally, the Tatars also presented Japanese books to Xinzhou. When the news reached the gate, it was even more jubilant. Jiang Swining stayed with Shenzai for a month because of her postpartum weakness, and saw that her body was gradually getting better, so she dared to set off to return to Xinzhou on the 22nd day of the lunar month. "I didn't dare to be too bumpy on the road, so I walked for 2 or 3 days. The news of the princess's return to the court, of course, has already spread to Xinzhou. The common people rarely see the nobles of the royal family, and when they were the victorious division of the army, when they heard the news, they came out to pay homage to the Princess Tianrong, and watched the triumphant demeanor, blocking the streets inside and outside. He entered the city at noon and entered the general's palace in the evening. The house had already prepared a clean and comfortable room, and some more powerful doctors came to ask for Shenzai and the baby who had given birth to less than a month, and also prescribed some warm and recuperative prescriptions. After such a toss, it was close to the end of the year. The Tatars, who had been harassing endlessly in previous years, were beaten to the ground by the new generals in charge of the army, and even the royal court was not saved. Shenzai, the eldest princess of Liang, who had been there for the country and her relatives back then, was also rescued safely, and even gave birth to a son safely. The people at the border pass rejoiced, the military camp and the outside were full of spirit, and the upper and lower levels asked for their lives together, and each family made efforts to set up a banquet in the city, one to reward the triumphant class teacher, the second to welcome His Royal Highness back to the court, the third to wish the baby a full moon, and the fourth to celebrate the Chinese New Year's Eve. On the night of the 30th day of the Chinese New Year's Eve, the general's mansion was naturally full of lights. Shenji's body is better, and she can already walk around the yard these days. Jiang Swining personally traced her makeup and went to the banquet hall. Siewei, Yanlin, Lucien, Yu Fangyan and others were all there, and even Ren Weizi, who was escorting another batch of grain and grass in the rear a while ago, was already in the banquet, and there were even generals in the army, and the orchestra was excellent. The scene is very lively, sweeping away the loneliness of the border city in the past, and there is a bit of fire, silver flowers, and the prosperity of the staggered planning, which makes people feel as if they have returned to the capital. I have never fought such a happy battle in my life. I want food and food, I want money and money, let alone fight for a month, or fight for another 10 years, and I don't coax. Yes, when have you ever been so comfortable? In the past, the last general underestimated General Yan, but now he is really a hero, old. Let's go for a drink. During the banquet, some people drank wine on their faces, supported each other, got up from their seats, and came to Yan Lin with a wine cup to toast him. Tonight's Yan Lin has changed out of his heavy armor, only wearing a dark black suit, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, and he doesn't know how many excellent winemaids around him frequently look at him. It's just that he can't even see it. Seeing everyone coming towards him, although he got up, he didn't serve wine, but said, "Generals, forgive me, Yan doesn't drink, I'm afraid you will be gracious." Everyone was stunned. Among them, the older general, who had a beard, even stretched out his hand and put his hand on his shoulder, and said with a big grin, "How can a hero like a general not drink alcohol? A manly man must get drunk when he is drunk. The big guys are so happy, you don't drink a drop of wine, what is this like? Come on, serve wine for our General Yan." Someone on the side immediately answered. After all, today is a flowing water seat in the whole city, the army and the people are happy together, mingle, and the original manpower in the general's mansion is naturally not enough to deal with these many things, so the second child and even the shopkeeper of some restaurants in Xinzhou City came to help. The people of the border city are open, and even some young women who want to find a good marriage have come. After all, if you can be a good man in the army, isn't it also a good family business? The answer was a beautiful girl in red, who had carefully traced her makeup for today, and pasted a golden flower on her eyebrows, carefully distinguishing the corners of her eyes and eyebrows that were a little charming. I don't know how many people's eyes fell on her. She was pouring wine for someone at the feast, and when she heard the call, she turned around with a flask. Yan Lin didn't pay much attention to it, and still said that he did not drink. The girl's eyes flickered towards him, her cheeks flushed slightly, and she was vaguely shy, looking at it on such a lively occasion, which added a bit of moving gesture. She turned around and poured the empty wine cup on the table, and then offered the wine to Yan Lin. Yan Lin frowned slightly, didn't reach out to pick it up, and only said to the coaxing generals, "You guys have drunk a little too much." Zhang Xuning helped Shen Zai in at this time. As soon as she saw this lively scene, she couldn't help laughing, and said to Yan Lin, "There was a life and death battle on the battlefield, and all the lives were handed over, what is a glass of wine? Several generals are also sincere, you might as well drink obediently." Yan Lin rolled his eyes and suddenly looked at her silently. Her heart skipped a beat. I went back in my memory, and I finally thought of something, and I was a little stunned. When those generals saw that such a pretty girl suddenly came in, they remembered the rumored Ning Er girl a few days ago, and heard that she was so familiar with Yan Lin's words, so they all laughed. Yes, Ning Er girl has said it, even if General Yan doesn't look at our thin noodles, he must always look at the girl's face. Come, we toast you. Yan Lin only said, "I don't drink." The bearded general couldn't help but wonder, "You're not 70 or 80, what can't you drink?" Yan Lin retracted his gaze looking at Zhang Xuning, seemed a little unhappy, closed his eyes and said, "I'm afraid of scaring people." Zhang Xuning actually had some hidden pain in her heart. As if he hadn't said anything, he said, "The kindness of the generals has been appreciated in my heart, but the good wine is still left for you to drink. Most of the people who lead the troops to fight are big and rude, where is there such a time when they are being swept away by others? Not to mention that Yan Lin is not very old, and he does not drink alcohol for some reason, which is really a little unpleasant." Fortunately, at this time, Xie Wei and Lucien finished talking outside and walked in. When Zhang Xuning saw it, she relieved the siege and said, "Mr. Xie is also here." This time, General Yan's front-line battle is certainly a great achievement, but if there is no rapid supply of food, grass, and baggage, this battle will not be able to be fought so happily. Why don't you all have a cup of respect for Mr. Xie Wei stopped and looked at her. Although he does not directly intervene in military affairs, but who in this Xinzhou city does not know his status? Moreover, he has few words, and he is a high-ranking civil official from Beijing. These old and rough military generals get along with him, and they always feel that it is better to talk freely with Yan Lin, and they are quite restrained, and occasionally sweep his calm gaze, and even be a little inexplicably stunned. As soon as Jiang Xunning's words came out, everyone's jokes also subsided. Immediately, he said yes repeatedly, and turned to pick up the wine cup to thank Wei. Xie Wei didn't speak. Jiang Xuning caught a glimpse of him empty-handed, looked to the side, and saw the girl who had originally brought the wine to Yan Lin, so she took the wine cup from her hand and wanted to hand it to Xie Wei instead. Originally, I just wanted to relieve Yan Lin. However, when she raised her eyes and touched his gaze, there was an indescribable complication in her heart. No matter what, this time the border army could directly smash the Tatar court and rescue the princess, and the first person she should thank was Xie Wei. Holding the hand of the wine cup, he stopped slightly. Jiang Xuning still held the cup with both hands, lowered his head slightly, and said, "Sir, please." The elixir is gently shaken in the pot. Xie Wei glanced at the wine cup, then at her, and then took the wine cup over. The fingertips couldn't help but touch her fingertips slightly, and her fingers shrank back as if they had been burned by something. At this time, all the generals said in unison, "The last general will wait for a cup of respect for the young master." Xie Wei didn't speak, poured his glass and drank the wine. There was a sudden applause and laughter around him, and he didn't show much joy, and handed the empty cup to the side, and a sharp-eyed waiter took the cup and retreated. The crowd re-entered their seats. Jiang Xuning also breathed a sigh of relief. No one noticed that the girl in red who had poured wine for Yan Lin before on the side turned a little pale when she saw that the wine glass had been drunk, and she actually showed a little uneasy and annoyed. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone was not paying attention, he bit his lip and quietly blended into the lively crowd and disappeared. Jiang Xuning helped Shen Zai sit down, and she also sat next to her. Ren Weizi and Yu Fangyan were bowing their heads and leaning to the side to talk. Lucien had no intention of seeing it when he sat down, and somehow he reacted in his heart, so he simply turned his eyes away and didn't look at it, wanting to talk to Xie Wei and Lin. It's just that before he could speak, the sword book outside walked in quickly and said something in Xie Wei's ear. Xie Wei's expression changed slightly. He turned his head sideways and looked in the direction of the door of the flower hall. At this time, I could only hear an elongated recital sounding in front of the general's mansion. Deputy Commander of Jinyi Wei has sent Lord Zhou Yanzi to. There was a sudden silence at the feast. Jiang Xuning raised her eyebrows even more steeply, and in surprise, she immediately frowned. After a while, Zhou Yanzi, who was dressed in dark blue civilian clothes, walked through the atrium, arrived in front of the hall, bowed down with a smile and said, "Zhou Yanzi came by order to congratulate the border pass on the great victory of the attack on Tatars. I have seen Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, and I have seen the young master." Chapter 215, Enlightenment. I haven't seen each other for 2 years, and the original Jinyi Wei Qin who has been transformed into the deputy commander of Jinyi Wei. In recent years, although Jiang Xuning has been far away from the capital, she has heard a lot of rumors about Jinyi Wei. It's no different from the previous life. The Emperor's blade, the lackey of the powerful, is ruthless and resolute. The difference is that in the previous life, his backer was Jiang Xuning, but in this life, it seems to be a different person. The dark blue brocade regular clothes are embroidered with dark beast cloud and thunder patterns, and it is not easy to see the calendar. But the embroidered spring knife on his waist has clearly shown his identity. Over the years, the position has been higher, and people have become more and more calm. There's already a bit of power in place. It's just that when he arrived in the hall, he was not half arrogant, and put on a posture of humility and congratulations. Jiang Xuning was already shocked when she heard his name. At this moment, seeing this person enter the hall with his own eyes, his heart was even more palpitating. However, there is such a big place in the hall. If Zhou Yunzi came all the way from the capital and heard some rumors in Zinzhou, he should guess that she is here, but he can't avoid it, so it is better to be calm. Xie Wei, Lucien, and others suddenly saw this uninvited guest, and knew that they were not attacking the Tartars for the sake of their family and country, and they had their own thoughts in silence. The rest of the generals did not know that they had inadvertently participated in the rebellion and deception of the king, and when the imperial court specially sent a messenger to come, it was the Shenchang side who had received the news of the great victory in the attack on the Tartars and wanted to reward them, so they were not surprised, but full of surprises, and their attitudes were particularly enthusiastic. Zhou Yunzi may not be known to the border generals, but Xie Wei, Yan Lin, Zhang Xuning and other cadres know it. For a moment no one spoke. Shen Zai sat on the head, her eyes flickered slightly, and she opened her mouth to speak, but she glanced at Xie Wei on the side, and closed her mouth again. The atmosphere in the field was a little delicate. In the end, Xie Wei laughed first and said, "Commander Zhou is polite, he came from the capital from afar, just in time for the celebration banquet. Come on, please take a seat." Everyone then greeted Zhou Yunzi. Zhang Xuning was also seated, and because she was sitting next to Shen Zai, her position was quite conspicuous. After Zhou Yunzi and Yan Lin saluted, they saw her almost at a glance, and they didn't know whether it was true or not, so they were slightly stunned, and even said to her, "I didn't expect the second girl to be here, I haven't seen her for 2 years." In the last life, Zhou Yunzi was a dog she raised, not a good person, and she could use all means to climb up. The Yan family raided the house, and he had 3 points of strength. Later, he changed his master several times, and attached to her, and then took Shenju, who did those things that had to be done for the imperial court and were not very good. If you talk about ability, it's definitely not bad. It's a pity that in the battle between her and Xiao Shu, the dog bit her in turn, causing her to fall into a place of no return, and even more involved Zhang Sha. In this life, the child in Wenjiu's womb was kept and the prince was successfully born. Shen Lang did not die mysteriously. Therefore, Shenju is still the king of Linzi, and he was not made the imperial brother, let alone ascended the throne. The person who Zhou Yunzi served was naturally replaced by Shen Lang, who is now in power. And Shen Lang has a gloomy temperament and mediocre government affairs, but he is good at fiddling with the emperor's weighing skills. It can be said that compared with Shenju, who ascended the throne later in his previous life, he naturally trusts and values this henchman who can do any dirty work. Zhang Xuning has been away from Beijing for 2 years, and she doesn't want people in the capital to notice her whereabouts, so she almost cut off contact with that side, and even Zhang Mansion didn't bother to bring back a few letters. With such a Zhou Yunzi's career is naturally no longer helpful. Earlier, I heard that he would often go to Jiang's mansion to walk around, and later the emperor was more and more important, and he was in charge of the brocade guard. She has always been wary and vigilant against this person, even if she used him to secretly remind Yan Lin, rectify the Qingyuan Bafu and even rescue Yu Fangyan, she never dared to trust it completely. At this time, it has been 2 years, and the identity is different. Zhang Xuning naturally wouldn't be stupid enough to treat each other with the attitude of the past, but just replied with a smile that neither seemed warm nor cold, "I haven't seen you for 2 years, congratulations to Lord Zhou for his steady progress and promotion a lot." A circle of people have seen the salute, and this is the real seed. Zhou Yunzi reported that the good news of the border pass was transmitted back to the capital, and the Sacred Heart was overjoyed, and the Dragon Face was happy, and he was specially ordered to come to reward him in person to show his favor. What else did he say about the Yanji Marquis mansion was finally able to return to the capital again, and young Master Xie also made great contributions to his planning. It looks like you don't know the truth. It seems that Yan Lin did not leave the exile land without authorization, as if his seizure of military power was not an edict but really the emperor's will, and even the original attitude of the royal family to ignore Shenzai and not save him when he saw death seemed to never exist. Everything is thunder and rain, and heaven is mighty. You must know that the Qatars led by Yan Lin on the surface and Xie Wei in the secret are really plotting rebellion, but Zhou Yunzi sat down and talked and laughed with them. This courage, even Xie Wei has to be admired. It's just that compared to the surprise and weirdness of others, he has a surprisingly calm. After all, after the battle, the attitude of the imperial court was already expected by him. Zhang Xuning couldn't help but be suspicious at first, but when she calmed down and thought about it carefully, she understood the trick. The battle of the border pass has been settled and is a foregone conclusion. The ambition of the Tatar wolf son, since he has murderous intentions towards Shenzai, will definitely attack Daqian in the coming year. Now that the First World War has been won, the whole country is boiling. Yan Lin, the prince of the former Yanji Marquis mansion, took charge of the military power with a guilty body, rescued the princess, and set foot on the Tatars, which was even more famous and praised by the people. Even the emperor received many accolades. On the other hand, in the imperial court, the heavenly sect was in turmoil and secretly watching, which can be called full of dangers. Shen Lang naturally knew that the gang of people at the border pass were deceiving the king and plotting rebellion. But it would do him no good to expose this fact. One inevitably confirmed the cold-blooded rumors of the royal family, which violated the teachings of the saints of filial piety and lost the hearts of the people. The other was that there were 100,000 soldiers stationed at the border pass, and if they really wanted to punish the crime, they would only force Yan Lin to rebel immediately. If the external troubles of the court are not eliminated, how can they add internal worries to themselves? It's better to be false and wrong, and push the boat down the river. Since you and the other rebels and thieves dare to claim that you have received the holy decree, I, as the emperor, dare to really pretend that I have issued this holy decree, and I will be able to win the hearts of the people and ease the situation. You can even send a Zhou Yunzi to the border to invite people to buy people's hearts. With the emperor's attention and high-ranking officials in sight, who is willing to risk killing their heads to rebel? Zhang Xuning thought of this, raised her eyes and looked at the people in the seat, staggering, smiling, but who was not pretending to be confused. Then I suddenly felt a cold air pour up. She didn't interject, she just listened to the crowd. Zhou Yunzi has become more and more long-sleeved and good at dancing in the past 2 years. Not only can he talk and laugh with Xie Wei, Yan Lin, and others, but even Yu Fangyan and Ren Weizi, who were sitting next to him, noticed it, and said with a smile, "When I said goodbye to prison back then, I never saw miss you again." Now that he is married to a good marriage, he is also rich, and he is really a fairy couple. Ren Weizi is not familiar with Zhou Yin. Yu Fangyan suffered from Yu Yu's torture back then, and she really got Zhou Yunzi's care, and even the abacus that learned to settle accounts was found with the help of Zhou Yunzi's envoys. She is a person who remembers her kindness, but she is sincerely grateful. Thanks to Lord Zhou's bothering to take care of it back then, it was just a lowly businessman, and he didn't have a chance to express his gratitude. This cup is to Lord Zhou. She took a glass of wine and toasted. Most of the people didn't know what their past was, but seeing that Zhou Yunzi even knew Yu Fangyan, they couldn't help but think a little higher. Zhang Xuning felt a little uneasy for some reason. Zhou Yunzi came from the capital, and Shenzai was in Tatar for 2 years. The distance was far away, and he almost didn't know anything about the situation in the palace. Only then did Zhang Xuning know that there were many changes in the capital. Those deceased people also have their own encounters. Zhang Suiwei married Shenju as a side concubine, and she was dignified and virtuous to help take care of all the general affairs in the Linzi Palace, and she was favored by Shenju at the beginning. And although Fang Miao is a concubine, compared with it, she can't help but be from a small family, and she is dressed as a magic stick, and she is not very similar to Shenju's temperament. Jingli thought that the backyard of this palace should belong to Zhang Suiwei. Unexpectedly, after a year of tossing like this, the original favored love gradually became dull and tasteless, but at that time, the quarrels became more and more lovely, full of fun, and gradually the piano was harmonious and glue-like. When Zhou Yinzi just set off from Beijing, the news of Fang Miao's joy had already reached the palace, which somewhat made the Queen Mother, who had lost power in Sinning Palace for a long time, happy and slightly sad. As for the companion reading in the past, most of them have a place to go. In addition to Yao Zimad's unfortunate death at home, the tricky and domineering Yu may have been matched with the Jinshi, but the other party did not have a high official position when he entered the Hanlin Academy, and he was not taken seriously, and he was mediocre. What is more strange is that Yao Rongrong actually entered the palace. The emperor was pampered overnight after drinking, and his luck was excellent. He was pregnant, and he was promoted by Xiao Shu, and he was named a talented person and lived in the side hall of her Zongqi palace. Shenzai hadn't heard of her partner for a long time, but now that she knows it, she can't help but feel a little bit of right and wrong. When he heard Xiao Shu's name, a sneer appeared on his lips. She grew up in the palace. How could she not taste Xiao Shu's deep meaning and ambition to put Yao Rongrong in her palace? But why is there no news of Shi? Chen Shi is the pearl of Chen Yunjin, a cabinet scholar, and she has already reached the age of talking about marriage. When Zhou Yinzi heard this, he held the wine glass, but he seemed to hesitate a little and didn't speak. This makes people even more curious. It's just that Lucien laughed on the side, but he easily broke through the trick, and even teased a little half-truth. Lord Zhou is now the deputy commander of Jinyue. What news does he not know about the capital? It's just a matter of his life. I'm afraid I'm embarrassed to say it in detail. His Royal Highness didn't know that as early as September this year, the family affairs between Lord Zhou and Chen Ji's daughter had already been decided, and they were just waiting for the marriage to be completed after the year. There was a burst of amazement in the audience. Shenzai was stunned for a moment, as if she didn't expect it. Even Zhang Xuning was stunned. The rest of the people reacted quickly, laughing again and again to toast Zhou Yinzi, wishing him such a good thing in the coming year. The banquet was even more lively, and most people's eyes had already fallen on Zhou Yinzi, obviously feeling that this deputy commander of the Jinyi Guard, he had the ability not to say anything, and there was such a powerful Yu family support, and the future was limitless. All of them said good things and took this opportunity to make friends. At this time, no one noticed Xie Wei. His slender fingers holding the wine cup had trembled slightly, and a strange sensation came up from the bottom, gradually becoming obvious and intense, making his body tense a little tighter. No one around saw that something was wrong. His pupils shrank, and everything that had happened at today's banquet quickly passed through his mind, and he raised his head to scan the surroundings, and swept over the servants and maids who had added wine during the banquet, pinching the fingers of the wine cup hard, but quietly put it down. Then he turned his head sideways, and first called Dayakan to command, and there was already a sense of killing in his eyes. Dayakan couldn't help but be surprised, and took the order to leave. Then he called the sword book and gave another explanation. Jianshu was even more stunned, reacted for a moment. Fang realized something, glanced at the wine cup he was holding, said yes in a low voice, and hurriedly came out of the hall and asked people to prepare cold water for bathing. Xie Wei then walked out of the hall. Only Yan Lin, Lucien, and others, who were sitting close, saw it. But they only thought that he had something to do, went out to deal with it, or was slightly drunk, went out to blow the wind, and came back after a while, and didn't pay much attention to it. This night was supposed to be a celebration banquet, and it was Chinese New Year's Eve, a difficult and happy day, and the people had their own hearts to offer. And at the end of the day, Hot noodles were served. Guangzhou does not produce rice, so Shaanxi folk mostly use pasta. There is a noodle restaurant in the city that is famous far and wide, and the boss makes a good dragon beard noodles, and today he is helping in the back kitchen, and he deliberately made his own unique work, and ordered a bowl of good noodles for everyone, and invited Shenzai, the eldest princess of Liang, to taste the customs of Xinzhou. The noodles were served in a white porcelain bowl, floating in a clear soup with a little oil. It was really as thin as a silk thread, and a little green vegetable leaves floated on the side, and 2 spoonfuls of fried pork, minced pork with 7 points of lean and 3 points of fat were added. And when it was served, it made people smell the fragrance. Shenzai knew that it was the people's intentions, so she got up and thanked her. Zhang Xuning also had a bowl, picked up a cluster with chopsticks and ate a bite, and drank a mouthful of noodle soup, and actually ate a rare fragrance, but she was not very surprised when she was raised by Xiejuan. However, when he turned his head and saw Shenzai sitting beside him safely, there was an indescribable calm. Those who died in the previous life are all fine in this life. She couldn't help but bend her lips slightly, leaned into Shenzai's ear, quietly lowered her voice, and said playfully, "This noodle is ordinary, the noodles sent by His Highness on the night of my birthday are more delicious." When Shenzai heard this, she turned her head sideways, but there was a bit of confusion in her eyes. "Noodles? What noodles?" Zhang Xuning was suddenly stunned. The fingers holding the chopsticks were stiff. She raised her head and looked at Shenzai, with a faint froze on her face. Shenzai was frightened by her. "Ning ning." Zhang Xuning whispered as if in a dream, 2 years ago, on the night of my birthday, after leaving Mingfeng Palace, didn't His Royal Highness send someone to send me a bowl of longevity noodles?" Shenzai was surprised. "How come?" She said, "You and Fang Miao can drink that night. I drank for a while and got drunk, and I didn't wake up until the next day. And the imperial dining room in the palace will not be able to move when it is over, and it will not be able to make any longevity noodles. Are you mistaken? Didn't you misremember?" At this moment, Zhang Xuning felt an empty blankness in her heart, and then gradually became clear after peeling off the cocoon. She didn't tell what was going on in her messy head, and subconsciously looked in a certain direction in the room. The spot was empty. I don't know when, Xiejuan has left the table and is nowhere to be seen.